Welcome back to part 2 of my bowl to sink video. I added part 1 in extreme speed just to give you some background and a memory of what I did. I'll also try to remember to put a link below to part 1. So the next stage in the process is to add a coating. In this case I use something called Clear Shield. It's like a urethane, so it's very durable for water resistance and that kind of thing. First I use a brush, and brush I find is more penetrating. It holds the fluid more, in this case the sealant, and I'm also using gloves so I don't get the sealant all over my hands, because that can't possibly be good for my hands. You could see in the beginning I was pulling out these loose bristles because I don't want that to get stuck and actually become part of the coat of sealant when the thing dries. Once I flip it over, and the area that I flipped on the bottom is got the sealant on, and I don't want it to stick to that paper, so I raise it up with those little triangular risers, and then I do the top so it will all stay free of the paper. Right there is a perfect example. I don't know if you can see that right there. See that little hair that came out of the brush, which you have to be very careful and look for those things, because that can be a nightmare. And then little pieces that get stuck, little chunks of wood. There's another one in front right there. And I think I got that right now. So that's good. Okay, so I let that coat of Clear Shield rather, dry overnight. I wanted to make sure it was rock solid before I moved to my next stage, which is sanding and then resining. And now you can see during the sanding stage I found a couple of brush hairs, so I had to scrape those out. And you don't want to have to do that, but it is what it is, so they got to come out because they will definitely show up. So, and you can also see here how that colorizing I did of the filler is blending in better, and it will blend in even better, more like this, which I think is kind of nice when it's all resined and finished. I decided to use Amazing Clear Cast. It's a 1-to-1 equal parts of A and B resin to cover the whole sink, bottom and top. There's all kinds of theories on how long you should mix. Should you scrape the sides? Should you scrape the bottom? Should you use a paddle? I've got a paddle. This is a small amount of resin. 4 ounces is really nothing. So I mixed it for 2 minutes, which was a good stir. And it wasn't too hot and it wasn't too cold in my workshop, so I was able to work with this resin without any problems. As you can see, I'm also using a foam brush. This is a 2-inch wide foam brush. The width isn't really relevant. I happen to have them, so I use them. But anyway, no hairs, which is way more critical in a resin pour or brush on in this case. The next process here is torching, basically heating up the resin and pulling out bubbles. Remember I said I put a clear coat on to help prevent bubbles? Well, you do your best, but sometimes the bubbles show up and you really got to work hard. You just stay focused on it and get those bubbles out. About every hour I go back to try to see if there's any more air bubbles, and if there is, I just torch it again. At this stage of the process, I have to find the center of the bowl, so I center my drain. easiest way for me to do that was from the underside, because I really didn't have a great reference or way to find dead center unless I put it back on the lathe, which I didn't do. So I found the center by turning it over and drilling through the bottom. Actually, this wasn't the last coat. I sanded and put naphtha on it this time. It really didn't matter whether it was denatured alcohol or naphtha, as long as I got rid of the dust. But this is the second coat. I did 3 in total, and I really wanted to make sure that I had a pretty heavy layer of resin on the base, the bottom, the inside bottom of this bowl, so I didn't have any issues with leaking, and that's where the water will be the most, so I wanted to make sure it was a pretty heavy coat there. So, as you can see, I have that hole as a reference so I know where my center is, and what I had to do is find a hole saw bigger than the flange on the top of the drain that sits down so it's not raised up above the base of the sink. I hope that makes sense. Anyway, I used this hole saw and I cut down about 1/4 of an inch or so, I'm gonna guess. That's what I aimed for. And I had to do that on the drill press, so the bowl was absolutely dead flat, and the rim that I was cutting was also equally dead flat. So that's what I did here. After the hole saw was cut to the right depth, I added a Forstner bit. Now, you might ask me, why didn't I use that Forstner bit to begin with? Well, it's not big enough. This is 2 1/8 inches, and that hole saw was 2 1/4 inches, I believe. So, and I needed that width of the hole saw. So I switched to the Forstner bit because it just takes out everything perfectly flat, which is perfect. It's exactly what I needed. I needed to figure out the depth of the wood, at least the depth from the inside where the flange will sit and the base of the sink itself, because you have to have a drain that is long enough to reach through there and screw down tightly, and you can see this one's 3 1/2, so it's pretty long. It's made for a vessel sink. Now I have to decide whether or not that's going to go through my countertop, because if it isn't, then I've got to gouge out some of my countertop, make a thinner countertop. There's a few issues involved with that. So now I'm making my final 1 5/8 hole, but I didn't have an 1 5/8 hole, so I had 1 3/4, which is fine. There's a little wiggle room. That's a good thing. Helps me line up that drain flange perfectly. Now this is the last coat of resin, and it also seals the wood area that I've now exposed by drilling the hole through the bottom of the sink. And I put a heavy coat on. I taped off the bottom of the hole, put a heavy coat on, and covered the inside of the drain. Probably not necessary, but I will err on the side of caution here. and seal everything off and put a little bit of a lip on the drain area, which you'll see. And that's it. It's all dry, it's all flat, all those cracks are sealed off. It looks pretty good. I'm happy with it. I'm just testing out the drain here to make sure it fits, and I had to take that bottom part out of there. That's where the resin was draining onto, where I had the tape. So I'm taking that out right now, and it was a very thin piece, so easy to get out, didn't cause any damage. And again, it's on the bottom, so never going to be seen. So it's all good. Now my last concern with this drain is that that nut may stick down further than the base of the sink, in this case a bowl sink, and hit the countertop, which means I have to cut out a hole bigger than that nut. And maybe if it extends past the counter, I can attach the nut to the underside of the counter, so it'll be a non-issue. So part 3 of this video will be coming hopefully in 2 weeks, where I'll show you the installation and preparations for the sink to install it. Please subscribe and hit the bell for notifications. Thanks.